the fourth and final video for lecture 2. This is lecture 2 that is a reappraisal of construction systems. So it's really about covering or reconsidering all the little bits and pieces from what you've learned in construction in the previous years. It's in no way is going to be detailed, and it wasn't. I think there's lots of gaps that I've left in there. I hope that it just prompted some thoughts. We spoke about the uh, we spoke about specific materials and just like the major materials or construction systems that they would be existing. There's a number others that exist. We also talked a little bit about detailing ideas and specifically the intentions about how we put together, thinking about how that would actually work, and then what happens when things go wrong. So what are those little bits you need to be aware of? What's those weak points that you need to think about carefully? The one big thing, think about the person who needs to make it. I think if you remember that, you will deal with many of those mistakes. The problem being that often through making it, it's then when the things go wrong. There's something else as well that Groak always used to state in his book. He always says, think about how you can assess whether something is correct. How can you check the quality or the standard of it? That's the trick. It's a bit difficult, but it's not impossible to think about. Um, okay, I'm designing this, but when do I need to be on site to check it? Can I remove a panel, or can I ask for something to not be in place so I can check whether that's in place? And typical example, the engineer needs to check the steel, whether the steel reinforcing has been bound and bent correctly before you cast the concrete, obviously. Um, but for an architect, there's a number of others, because you have to check a lot of other different aspects in the end. Okay, so this goes to the final aspect I want to just quickly cover, and this is really important. What you find is that in future you're going to be confronted with a number of new construction systems and materials. It's inevitable. You'll have to learn about new ones continuously. You'll go to new sites. You'll have new clients. So you'll have to find a way of making sense of it. You can't simply say, I'm going to be the designer, be it interior architect or landscape architect, that will only work in material X. It might be interesting to work like that, but I don't think it gives you a lot of scope to explore and work in different contexts. And if we start saying that you have to work that's in places that are and you have to work in a process that's contextually appropriate, then you have to be flexible and open for something new. So as part of this, I went to speak to Aubrey Crawford, who used to teach our department for a number of years, um, but he's also he has extensive experience of working in practice, but also working in places with new innovative materials. So I thought this was really appropriate to speak to him about it. And I thought I'll get a very easy recipe for you, and you can simply just follow it. But his first really critical thing he said there's no simple recipe. It's very much an approach to design and construction. And I think that's important. So it's never going to be easy. It's a long road. We can't read it up in one book. You have to be willing to learn continuously, and it really is that approach to say that I will always ask and inquire, and I will always learn from where I'm at, see what is possible, and I'll be open for new ideas. I think that was really what I've learned from him in that process. Um, then I think be aware that this knowledge and experience will develop over time. Over time, you'll actually learn more. So be open for it. And I think that's nice. You will build experience. And if you're open for that, then I think over a number of years, you will learn a lot. And you'll be the person that will share the knowledge and experience with others. That means if you're new and you're young, when you're working with someone who's got more experience, be open for those discussions. And the best thing is ask. They will always want to share what they've learned over time and ask for specific details, specific types of construction systems. I think you'll learn a lot from that. So the other thing that he shared with me, which I think is important, is chat to builders when you're on site. I think that's difficult. We often, if when you get to site, you might think of them as being the enemy. You should work with them. That they're always wrong. That kind of thing. But that's really incorrect. Builders work with construction systems and technologies on a continual basis. So I would always, and my wife, for instance, does the same thing. She has a number of builders that she knows she can phone and she can discuss questions with them. And they're more than willing because there's one day then they'll phone her again when they've got questions in the end. So make friends with them, chat with them, ask their opinion, and you don't need to follow through with it. If you think, yeah, yeah, man, this is just an easy way out. It's not really going to give me the intention. Then you can change the, the solution in the end. But you'll often find that when you speak to them about how certain things can be built or made, that they really do know of a lot of different options. And that's really important for you as the designer in the end, to be aware of that. Next, he said, speak to hardware store owners. They know a lot. They know of different materials, different systems, different options there are. The trick is, though, find good hardwares where those owners do spend time, or the guys that have been in the industry for a long time. Okay, otherwise, you won't get a lot of good advice. Last thing is make something yourself. If you can, get that project that you design and build yourself so you can learn from your own mistakes. But the best thing I think is when you are working on your own projects, it doesn't need to be a construction project, it could simply be making anything. I think in that process, you're often involved in all the different layers. You're often part of having to buy the different materials, the paint, the fixing, where the Coprox goes on, where the DPC is, and so forth. It really helps you to understand it. And I think in the process of making things, whatever you're making, you learn about assembly, and that's good. And you learn about tolerances. And then once you've got that under your belt, it makes the whole construction process already a lot better and defining and specifying it much easier. Okay, so try and do that in future. Then understand the place. He said that. So the second thing is he said continuously learn. That's the big thing. The next one, learning from people and place. Um, and I think we've spoken about this often. Um, understand where you're working, what the site is, and who the users are. And you can learn a lot from it because that will tell you what type of material can I use, what's abundant in the local areas, and what can people do, what's the local capabilities, the local labor capabilities. If you align that, the success of a project is the chance of success is much higher. The problem is if you bring something that's completely new, you have no idea what the site is, and you've got to transport it for kilometers of hours or for long distances. Then the risk is really big. The next thing he said is always go and inquire and ask about the place. Try and learn from the process. There was this example where he said you go to a place that's very hot. It might be boiling hot at that time. You ask someone, is it hot? And they'll tell you, no, this is cool. This is comfortable. That means it gets very hot in that place. Okay, so what I'm getting to is ask locals about something, but try and learn from what is not said or the way that it's said to see if you can learn more from it. Sometimes you'll speak to people and they'll say, and you'll propose a system and they will say, yeah, yeah, you can do it. But you can pick up that they think that there's a problem. Be open for that. Ask them, what do you think is the problem? Because ultimately, that building is going to be in that place for a long time. And so the local conditions are really critical to understand. Lastly, understand the local or look for the local materials and technologies. If you can, use it. Otherwise, link up with it so you can learn from it. You can use it to leverage new and alternative technologies. Lastly, he said that, okay, so you learn from people in place, you continuously learn, and then when you deal with materials and technologies, there's some things you need to be careful of and think about as you're working. One is always ask yourself, what is that role of the element that you're designing? That column, that wall, that insulative material. What's its function? That windowsill. What does the windowsill do? Windowsills both shed water, but also share, but it also defines the opening, but can also be considered as a structural entity to, as if you include the lintel at the top, what is that part that you're busy with, and what must it really achieve? And sometimes it's one function, and sometimes it's multiple. But if you understand what it must do, it's already easier to understand what are the, as you say, is the next thing, the weak points of it. Look for those weak points. Look for those points where you think, okay, wait a minute, that's not going to work. Um, then we spoke about this already in the lecture, said try and draw, conceptualize, or develop the assembly process. Think about how it gets done. Don't just draw the final product and say, well, I don't know, it'll be done. Ask yourself, okay, if I were to do this, how do I get there? I mean, something I often do when I draw a section, I often draw a detailed, the 1 in 20 section or so forth, from the foundation upwards. Even though, I mean, by then I've understood the whole structure, so but I like drawing it from that way because it's part of that thinking through the process of making it. Because you start at the very bottom and then you bring it up, and as you're drawing up, you realize, oh, wait a minute, there's a new problem, and so forth. So find ways that you can think through the assembly process. He then said something very important, we spoke about it a few times. Remember that people make buildings. So how can you fit someone into that space? How can a large person get into that service shaft to fix the pipe in the end? How can you get to that end of the roof? Or how do you get to this flat roof section here um, to fix it in the end? Um, and that's actually part of the Health and Safety Act as well these days, that you have to think about the continual maintenance of these spaces. But if you remember that someone actually needs to get their hand into those spaces to fit the bolt in, it makes life a lot better. And the thing is, um, if you neglect it, that's the point where someone tells you you can't do it, or when it's done in a shoddy manner in the end. Okay. Um, Look for those weak points. There's one more aspect I would like to add to it. So consider it yourself. Look for them. So what would be the typical weak point? But if you know an architect with lots of experience, or a landscape architect, or an interior architect that's been in the industry for a long time, or a builder for that matter, ask them, if you've got this kind of relationship with them, ask them what are those weak points that you have to look for. When you're on site, where are the problems that typically arise? Where do people hide the, the mistakes, and I think that's important because you'll find you have to get those shortcuts in the end to go and check. So go and build up that repertoire of weak points to consider. Finally, design for flexibility. Always be open for designs to be changed. Um, have joints that overlap a bit. Think about ways that you have space between different materials, so you can fit something in between that. Do you have a cover that will be placed on top of the joint, so that you can cover the shoddy fixing in the end? So I mean, that's what a floor skirting is. So you fix the floor and then you put the skirting over, so we don't see the poor joint of the other side. That's the kind of flexibility that we can design for in the end. So think through it. Good. Now, as a designer, you have to have experience, certainly, but then there's one more document that I think is helpful, and this is your South African national standards. And there's a number of them that get renewed every year or every few years. Um, you'll see that they cover a range of different aspects in a building. I mean, and these standards relate to other standards and so forth. It's both important to adhere to it, obviously, but I also find sometimes it helps me to when I design something. Let's say I'm working with the walls at that point. Go through that again and just check again. What are those things I need to remember that need to be in place? Because it prompts you as well to make good decisions, to include the correct aspects, to not design walls that are too high, for instance, and so forth, or staircases that doesn't work. So use the national standards both as something to adhere to, but as a resource to just to prompt you and remind you of the important things that shouldn't be forgotten. Okay, so it shouldn't be a document that collects dust in your shelf or on your computer in the end. Um, and then finally, this document I told you about, Hans Wegelin's model specifications book. It's actually called Construction Specifications and Standards 6.3. Use that as a guide for you to help you with your specifications in the end. Okay, so this brings us to the end of this lecture. Um, you're welcome to still contact me if you have any questions. I hope that in many ways what I told you now was not new, that in some ways you thought this was a really long or boring lecture because all of this is old news. I hope that that's the condition or the case because that means you're ready. You can continue and build your knowledge base further because this is really the basics of construction systems and it's not even detailed in that way. Um, but do build a framework and a process for yourself so that you can continuously learn about new construction systems, about new solutions, and explore how you apply it. Because every time you apply it, it becomes a new solution, a new way of putting it together, and it gives you a number of opportunities to see, to articulate it. And ultimately, you'll see what the limitations and the opportunities are for you as a designer to fit it all together. Um, I will on the notes that I share online, you will see that there are a number of references that you can use that can help you. So the National Building Standards, the Architecture, the Construction Primer, use it to help you as a guide or a basic guide. And then I would just like to thank Aubrey Crawford for the images and the information and the discussions we can have regarding construction systems and the assembly thereof. If you're ever interested, chat to him. He'll teach you a lot about construction in the end. Well, thank you, and see you guys next week.